Let's move on and let's talk also about what is going on further afield. And the just extraordinary situation yesterday where we saw an assassination attempt on the Slovakian Prime Minister, Robert Fico. Philip, you're the sort of person who rather usefully knows more about these things than most of us know. We've been told he's fighting for his life. He's in a critical but now stable condition this morning, which is good news. There have been attempts, and successful attempts, sadly, on European Prime Ministers' lives before. Not one on a British Prime Minister for a couple of hundred years, thankfully. But the circumstances, the Interior Minister in Slovakia is saying that they believe this was actually politically motivated. A 71-year-old suspect is in custody. What is the background to this, do you believe? Well,
there have been a couple of attacks on British Prime Ministers who the RAF tried in Brighton, and they tried to more Downing Street. No successful. Thank goodness this is very rare. The background is Fico was on a normal Prime Ministerial day out and went over to shake the hands of people in the crowd, and a gunman came up and shot him up to 5 times.
Point-blank range.
Virtually point-blank range. What the motivation of the gunman is at the moment, there's a lot of speculation, but nothing confirmed. Fico himself...
now, how do we pronounce his name? Because, again, I've been told it's Fico.
It could be Fico. It could be Fico. But you try and get an Ulsterman to pronounce anything. It's really difficult. So we would hopefully get a Slovakian come and translate.
I am told it's Fico, but
So Fico elected. He's slightly controversial in that he aligns himself with Viktor Orban, and Viktor Orban and Fico sort of align themselves with Vladimir Putin and what's going on in Europe, and therefore they have been working in the background behind a lot of EU policy and against what's happening in Ukraine. So that could be an element of political motivation that's going in, but we just don't know it.
Well, indeed, the 71-year-old suspect, we understand, is involved on sort of, some sort of free speech involvement. We think of some kind here, has been involved in political campaigning of some sort. So, but again, as we know, it's not yet clear. But I mean, look, at least 4 shots were fired. It's extraordinary that he has survived, and it does appear that he will survive. But the implication of this, I mean, very, very scary for political leaders around the whole of Europe. And the whole idea, again, that if we're going to get politically motivated attacks, of course, we've seen what's happened in the UK. We've seen with Joe Cox and David Amos. This is not as rare as it should be in Western democracies.
And there's a couple of other things that are coming into play here. We're seeing an increase in violence across Europe. We had the prison breakout and prison officers being shot in France only this week. We're seeing the demonstrations that are going on in Georgia. We have seen the head of GCHQ at the National Cyber Show in Birmingham turning around and talking about physical threats from Russia across Europe and into the UK, and the threats of physical attacks, not just cyber attacks. We've got the EU elections coming up.
There's European Union elections, yes, in June.
Putin is trying to influence things, and there will be organisations and groups that are associated with him trying to stir up real problems across Europe. We could be, it's too early to say at the moment, but we could be seeing the beginnings of this at the moment. That's very worrying.
It's extremely concerning, and especially, you say, with the ongoing war in Ukraine. And again, you can certainly see Russia and China's hand, again, Russia particularly, their links with Iran in terms of what's happening in the Middle East and funding Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthi rebels as well. But also we've seen Xi Jinping having the red carpet rolled out for him across Europe as he's been on a tour in Europe. But he's back home in Beijing, and Vladimir Putin has popped up to visit him. Again, we talk about those axis of evil. I mean, truly an axis of evil. 2 deeply authoritarian figures leading murderous, tyrannical regimes where they basically, kill off anyone who could be a challenger to them. Fascinating also, and frankly, both laughable and disgusting. Vladimir Putin saying, commenting on how terrible it was, the attack on the Slovakian Prime Minister. This is a man who has blatantly ordered the murder of his political opposition.
Oh, very much so. His political opposition either suffer some form of chemical attack, they fall out of a window, or they choose to have a heart attack next weekend. And sometimes they get no choice whatsoever. Putin has gone to China to see Xi Jinping not long after his re-inauguration as president, and he's gone there for 2 reasons. One is the kudos of a state visit. And
there aren't many places he can go because he's indicted as a war criminal.
He's indicted as a war criminal, and therefore there's an Interpol red notice out to arrest him. China will not haven't signed up to that, and therefore won't arrest him. And the second thing is, China is critical to Putin to provide him military materiel, whether it be dual-use items, so items that can be used, sold as civilian items, but could be used for military purposes, or the components stripped out and used for military purposes, to help him deal with what's going on inside Ukraine, because the Russian defence industrial base is suffering.
Yeah, indeed. And again, people say, talk sometimes government ministers, but China aren't a hostile state, they're not an enemy state. Yeah, yeah, they are. They're aiding and abetting our own enemies. It's just extraordinary, isn't it? It is quite terrifying what is going on there. And in terms of Ukraine, the ability of the Russian forces to make advances on Kharkiv, the second city of Ukraine. I mean, this is like advances on Birmingham, for goodness sake. Big concerns there. And Zelensky has cancelled some trips abroad. Now he goes abroad again. People, lots of the useful idiots for Putin always criticise him. He's on the world stage. He goes on the world stage so we can keep focusing on Ukraine, so we can keep the support from the publics for money to be spent to help support Ukraine against Russia. He's had to cancel those trips because of concern about these advances. Now the American military aid is now getting to Ukraine, and we've had Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, visiting this week. Does that mean there'll be more of ability for a fight back by the Ukrainians?
There'll be more ability to stabilise the front line. The Russians in the north, and they're attacking the Kharkiv, haven't been going in to try and, I think, get to Kharkiv. I don't think they've got the ability to do that. They've been saying it's to create a buffer zone. And looking at the troops that they're putting in, it is to create a buffer zone. In that area, just slightly further to the west of it, Russian troops fighting for Ukraine have attacked into the Belgorod area on a couple of occasions, and that's annoyed the Russians quite a lot, and this is creating that buffer. This is day 812 of Vladimir Putin's 10-day special military operation. He's just been sworn in as president again. The Ukrainians are still continuing to strike Russia in Crimea with the ATACMS missiles that are coming in from the United States and elsewhere. The artillery shells will start to get to the front line and stop the Russians' advances. The Russians have...
But we still don't give enough to help them defeat Russia. That's the bit that bothers me.
We're not.
Is that a deliberate policy?
Well, no, this has to come as a whole package. You can't just give more ammunition and say you go out and defeat. From a military perspective, you have to get control of the air. And create local air superiority, is what's called. So that's where the F-16. That's where the F-16s are going to be critical, as well as the air defence missiles that they're pushing forward. And then you create your military punch, and you need an engineering bit that goes in and clears the minefields and all the rest of it. That's not strong enough at the moment. Then you put your armoured punch in behind it to try and break through. But until you get that air superiority, then the rest of it is pointless. You're just going to lose lots and lots and lots of tanks and people.
Although we've seen, in terms of the battlefield losses, you Russians far exceed those of Ukrainians, both in terms of lost lives and lost munitions.
Reportedly, yesterday alone, the Russians lost 1,500 troops and 19 tanks. That is significant for a day. It's usually about 1,000 troops a day.
But again, Russia has a very large country. There's forced conscription,
and they've got a history of being able to absorb massive losses.
Well, again, also if the people making decisions in Moscow and St. Petersburg don't actually have to see the actual loss of life, and it's not their sons being sent. They're using the sons from Soviet satellite states a lot of the time. That they don't care about basically cannon fodder of their young men being sent to slaughter.
Exactly, and with the new Russian defence minister being an economist, what's that suggesting? What that's suggesting is, well, his predecessor wasn't a fighting man.
No. But fair, neither are ours. I mean, there was made a big thing about this. Our defence secretary is rarely someone who's fought in war.
Exactly, or they retired.
Should they be? I mean, we don't expect the education secretary to be a teacher.
No, not at all. You need the advisors who have got the military experience to advise.
Okay.
It's almost better to have someone who hasn't got preset ideas in their minds.
Indeed. Philip Ingram, always so good to have you in talking about this stuff. He knows what he's talking about. I know. It's a mad idea. It'd never catch up.